Today on BRStv, we're talking brown corals. Hi, I'm RT, your host of 52 FAQ, where each week we answer your questions related to reefing. This week we're answering Aquanut86's question, how and or why do higher levels of nitrate turn your corals brown? Today we're going to answer that question as well as take a larger look at SPS coral coloration and give some direct advice in achieving the best coloration possible with methods which will absolutely produce results. Before I share anything today, it's important to remind us all what the community thinks we know about corals is based on discussion, a lot of anecdotal evidence, and really more or less just our collective best guesses. The most commonly shared thought processes are often based on strongly plausible theories backed with common experiences, but they're still pretty far from proven fact. So that said, in relation to Aquanut's question, it's very commonly believed that one of the major contributors to SPS corals losing their brilliant coloration and browning out is high nutrients in the reef tank. High nutrients most commonly refers to high nitrates and phosphates, and the belief is the high nutrient levels encourage rapid growth of the symbiotic algae within the coral's tissue, known as zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae is brownish in color, and the more that's contained within the coral's tissue, the browner the coral will appear. In extreme cases, the zooxanthellae population will be so high that the coral completely browns out and overtakes all of the coral's natural coloration pigments. I think it's pretty well established that tanks with an abundance of phosphate and nitrate will brown out corals, and tanks with very low nutrients will tend to have more colorful corals. However, this is one of those cases where this is very far from universally true. There are certainly plenty of low nutrient tanks which have brown corals, and lowering nutrients after the fact doesn't bring the coloration back for many reefers. If you're one of these reefers, I think it's worthwhile to take a more holistic approach to coloration. While it certainly seems to be true that high nutrients cause SPS corals to brown out, I think there are a couple things we should keep in mind. First, low nutrient tanks are very frequently the result of good maintenance practices, and the phrase high nitrate and phosphate tank can fairly frequently be exchanged with poorly maintained tank. High nitrates and phosphates are a direct result of an imbalance between nutrient input and export, which in a vast majority of cases is going to result in a variety of chemistry-related issues beyond just high nitrate and phosphate. A while back, someone commented on one of our videos with one of the most insightful comments I've heard in all my years of reefing. Successful reefers are not good at maintaining aquariums, they're good at maintaining water. A successful reef tank filled with healthy, growing, and colorful corals is just a result of being good at maintaining water. That's absolutely the case. The other element related to brown corals is high nutrients are very far from the only cause. I think we've all seen corals brown from handling or fragging, coral dips, significant lighting or chemistry changes, flow changes, or even just from moving them from one area of the tank to another. Virtually any significant environmental change can cause a coral to almost completely brown out. It's hard to know what mechanism is at play here. Does any stressful environment change cause a coral to react by promoting rapid growth of zooxanthellae? Or do these factors somehow impact the coral's natural fluorescent and non-fluorescent pigmentations? It's hard to know for sure, but I think it's been pretty universally demonstrated that browning has a very direct link to environmental stresses, which are primarily related to water chemistry, lighting, flow, and physical trauma. So to bring the overall point home, I think it's important to keep in mind that while high nutrients might be a direct cause in many instances, it can also be indicative of other issues as well. So if solving nutrients alone doesn't bring out the coloration you're looking for, it might be time to take a more holistic approach that looks at all of the environmental stressors that could cause this. This is where our very direct advice in achieving awesome coloration comes in. While there are always a lucky few that fall outside the norm, there's that one single thing that 95% of all the best colored tanks out there share, and that's stability. Life has shown the ability to adapt to a seemingly endless array of environments and still maintain healthy, reliable biological functions. However, many organisms are not capable of adapting to constantly changing environments, particularly those organisms who've only had to adapt to subtle environmental changes in the last 10,000 years or more. I think most reefers and scientists will agree that SPS corals fit into that category, and while they can adapt and survive to a fairly wide range of environments, they do best in stable environments. So, with that in mind, I'll share what that means to the BRS team in terms of SPS coloration. The first being water chemistry. I think we all universally agree that stable low nutrients is fairly critical to maintaining the best coloration. What low nutrients means varies a bit from reefer to reefer, but most interpretations are likely going to produce results as long as they're stable. If you allow the nitrate and phosphate to rise significantly and then use huge water changes every 3 months, chemicals or medias to reduce them rapidly, it can certainly brown the corals out or simply keep them that way if they're already in that state. There are 100 ways to maintain stable low nutrients, starting with managing the amount of food that you're putting into the aquarium. Reducing foods is obviously the easiest and most sustainable way. Carbon dosing methods like Zeovit, Red Sea's NO3PO4X, or vodka, well-designed refugiums, algae scrubbers, quality skimmers, frequently replaced filter socks, or automated filter pad solutions like the roller mat, and of course, just a regular water change schedule. Stable salinity, as well as calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, and potentially elements like strontium and potassium are all important. Salinity is probably the most important because as that rises and lowers, every single element level is impacted as they become more or less concentrated. However, right behind that is alkalinity. Alkalinity is the one element I can tell you with complete confidence is the #1 parameter all of the best SPS tanks monitor closely. Stable alkalinity is proven to have all types of positive impacts on both coloration and growth. A lot of the pros test it daily without fail. Right behind that, I believe, is acidity of the water and maintaining a stable pH. There are fairly well documented calcification and growth benefits, and likely overall health benefits assumed with higher pHs near 8.3. While I won't go as far as to say there are guaranteed coloration benefits with a stable pH, I do think it's very likely, especially when done in unison with other elements of stability. Since the most significant cause of large pH swings are related to carbon dioxide in the tank, the best solutions are to address that. The most popular being lighting a refugium at night to uptake excess CO2, dosing kalkwasser or high pH 2-part at night, feeding your skimmer with fresh air from outside your home, and using a CO2 scrubber on the intake of your skimmer, which is also becoming pretty popular. Stability in lighting is also essential, not only implementing the right spectrum and intensity, but also resisting the temptation to mess with it constantly. Historically, this was easy because you can't make a lot of adjustments to halides and T5 lighting. More or less, you just use bulbs everyone else has had success with, plug them in, and the corals grow and they color brilliantly. With LEDs, that can be a lot harder. Make sure to do some research and select spectrum and intensity settings other people are having success with rather than what looks good to your eye. What looks good to the eye has zero correlation to what's healthy to the coral, and behind that, set it and forget it. If you make significant changes, I'd make them in incremental stages slowly over 4 to 8 weeks, and then leave them that way for 3 to 6 months and measure the results. One of the causes of corals browning out related to lighting is often thought to not be enough light, and the corals increase their zooxanthellae population to produce more nutrients and compensate. In this case, many reefers will find ways to increase the intensity of the light. Just keep in mind that too much light is not horsepower, where more is always better, and light is 100 times as likely to kill the coral than not enough. One other element to consider related to this is the zooxanthellae are using elements like light, water, CO2, nitrate, and phosphate to produce amino acids and carbohydrates for the coral. Rather than using light to increase the nutrients the zooxanthellae produce, many reefers supplement light by dosing amino acids, carbohydrates, and foods like reef chili or PE calanus or Hikari cyclopods. Providing these elements of nutrition reduces the reliance on the zooxanthellae population and in turn is believed to provide better coloration. However, like the other things we mentioned today, to be beneficial, they need to be dosed regularly and provide a stable source of nutrients, or you might actually have the opposite results as the corals continually try and compensate for the irregular availability of nutrients. For instance, on the BRS-160, we maintain near zero nitrate and phosphate with the Zeovit system. Some people refer to this system as an ultra-low nutrient system, but I think that's pretty far from the case. While it might be ultra-low nitrate and phosphate, the BRS-160 is what I'd refer to as a very high nutrient system because we feed fairly heavily, dose a variety of aminos, particulate foods, and the water column is what I refer to as nutrient-rich. Because of that, the corals have less reliance on the zooxanthellae and in turn, limited demand for nitrate or phosphate as well. Flow is also an environmental issue, however enough flow is pretty easy to achieve with today's powerheads, and most reefers don't change them often, so this is typically a pretty stable component of most reef tanks. I would try and get that 30 to 50 times turnover with varied flow patterns most SPS tanks do best with. Most of these components are all likely to have the biggest impact in reference to the browning effect related to zooxanthellae populations. However, behind that is the coral's natural fluorescent and non-fluorescent color pigments. The two most common ways to promote the creation of these pigments and better coloration in general of the actual coral is lighting and spectrum changes, but right behind that is trace elements. At this point, trace elements have a fairly well-accepted impact on coloration. There are hundreds of trace element products out there, and I guess I don't recommend randomly dosing them and hoping for results. The best options have very specific dosing recommendations and results tied to them. The most common being the coloration enhancers by Coral and Zookt and Red Sea's Coral Colors program. Both of these are straightforward and they have distinct results from following their program stably. I hope we've clarified some questions you may have had on SPS browning and coloration today. If you'd like to learn more about SPS corals in general, make sure to check out Week 37, Small Polyp Stony Corals, SPS Selection, Care, and Placement. And if you like what we're doing here, give us a quick thumbs up and subscribe to see next week's BRStv 52 FAQ.